Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonny Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. This week I talked to Andrew Miller, the Chief Operating Officer of the Minnesota Vikings. We talk about how he got to start working in sports, what brought him to Minnesota, and how his job works in concert with the football side of the business on this week's Who the Folk podcast. But before we hear from Andrew, this week's podcast is brought to you by TC Jewfolk's Minnesota Mamala's Stories from the Tribe event on June 24th at Bethel Synagogue. Stories from the Tribe is a live, on-stage summer show featuring 12 true and original stories somehow threaded to being, or having, a mamala. The good, the bad, the golden, and the hilarious. Tickets go on sale to the public on May 13th. You can get them and more information at bit.ly/mamalas. That's bit.ly/MAMMALEHS. Andrew Miller, welcome to the Who the Folk podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Lonny.
You are the Chief Operating Officer of the Minnesota Vikings, which is probably one of the coolest titles of anybody I've interviewed here. And I've interviewed some really great people, but from a title and job standpoint, this might be way up there. So I'm really excited. We're here in your office in Eagan at the Vikings headquarters. You're about to start your sixth season with the team. What was your path to working in sports? Because I know as somebody who, I realized at a young age I was never going to be an athlete, but the idea of writing about sports or working about sports has always interested me from the time I was probably 5 or 6 years old.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. And I don't know that I ever dreamed of having this title or working for the Minnesota Vikings, but it is something that is a lot of fun and I enjoy. Similar to you, I grew up playing sports, loving sports. Thought I could be a professional athlete. I was fortunate. I was a left-handed pitcher. That gave me a whole bunch of extra opportunities.
Oh yeah. You pitch your whole life. You pitch into your 50s as a left-handed pitcher.
Yeah, you probably have to be better than I was, but
okay, fair enough.
I was fortunate. I walked on to the Cal baseball team and pitched for them sparingly, but pitched for them. And I think once I got to Cal, I realized very, very quickly that the dream of being a left-handed pitcher, unless lightning strikes my arm and I start throwing 95 miles an hour, it's not going to happen. And you see very quickly, your teammates or the people you're playing against, those are future major leaguers. Yeah. And that is not me. And so I need to find something else around the sport that I would enjoy, that, if I'm passionate about sports, I can find something that I can do for a living that incorporates that.
Well, especially teams in the, Pac-10 or Pac-12, depending on when you were there. Stanford, USC, UCLA, traditional baseball powers. Those are some serious, and Arizona, of course, Arizona State. Those are some, you're playing against some dudes.
Yeah, you just mentioned it. So when I was there, it was the Southern Six-Pack was our division.
Okay.
It was Cal, Stanford, UCLA, USC, Arizona State. So it was, pretty much, the 1927 Yankees Murderers Row every single weekend. And then your off, weeks, your Tuesday games or Wednesday games was Santa Clara and San Jose State and USF and Nevada Reno and Fullerton and Long Beach and places that, you didn't really get much of a break. It was really high level of baseball.
Yeah, Fullerton and Long Beach have won national titles in the last 30 years in baseball too.
Yeah, every week was basically, good teams you were playing against. And, some of those teams produced multiple major leaguers that, were there at the time. And so, again, as a player, it very quickly kind of showed okay, this is not probably the level I can, compete at, for a living.
For sure. So you learned playing in sports wasn't going to be in your future probably. How do you make that transition to the front office or just sort of general office side of being in a sports team? How does that work? What was your background to get you here?
Yeah, so at Cal, I ended up majoring in business. So I went into school thinking I wanted to be a sports journalist, and they didn't have a journalism major. So I just started taking classes that I enjoyed, took Econ 1, and then business administration, the intro class, and had no idea. I didn't know people who were in business, so to speak, and
okay.
Thought I actually enjoy these classes, and took some internships, some sports related, some not. Was very fortunate. Got an internship with the Oakland A's for a semester. And then, frankly, I graduated and, thought, the best companies in the world are recruiting here. And baseball has been my entire life. It's everything I've focused on. And maybe I should try something different. And if baseball is meant to be, I'll come back to it. So I actually took a job at Solomon Brothers in New York on Wall Street. Was in fixed income research trading, working on a bond analytic software program that they had, and did that for a year. Realized I wanted to be back out in California and moved into a tech banking role. It was 1998. It was sort of the heart of the tech and dot-com boom, and was running around Silicon Valley working on IPOs and mergers and acquisitions and learning the business. And I really enjoyed it. I didn't really know what an investment banker was. And, but it was fun, and it was a good learning experience, and, did it, and then moved into venture capital, was with Global Crossing when they went bankrupt. And so sort of saw the highs and the lows of the dot-com boom and then the bust, and ultimately ended up deciding to go to grad school. And I went to Northwestern where I did a JD MBA, and didn't go there thinking about baseball or sports. I was thinking about the intersection of law and business, and that it was the right time in my career to, go and round out my education and kind of return back to a more established private equity firm or a technology firm, and understand how the law, interacts with the business world. And my first year of law school, I was a 1L at Northwestern doing 1L classes, and thought, I don't need a job for 3 years. I should figure this out now. And Moneyball, the book, had come out, and I read it, and I realized it literally happened down the hallway from me. Started when I was an intern at the A's. I had no clue. I was doing 1 day a week in the business administration office for them, and didn't know what they were working on down the hall. But when I read it, I realized the whole world has completely changed from 6 or 7 years ago. And maybe my background's more well suited, or maybe I'll be more interested in the sports world at this point.
Well, and it's funny that you mentioned Moneyball, because I was actually going to ask you if your time with before you mentioned what year, the sort of around, you mentioned 1998. I was wondering if your time with the A's was around the Moneyball era. That was the first, you mentioned the A's, and about that vintage, that's about what I was thinking of was your time there. So so you've then made the move to sports after you finished Northwestern?
Yeah, so I spent probably 12 months just trying to talk to anyone who would talk to me about their role and how to break into the game, and what different positions could be, and how different organizations were set up. And was really fortunate that at some point someone said, hey, I don't really have the ability to introduce you to him, but you should reach out to Chris Antonetti. At the time, he was assistant general manager of the Cleveland Guardians, and sent him a completely cold email, introduced myself, and a week later we talked, and a month later they'd hired me as an intern. So between my second and third year of the JD MBA program, I interned in Cleveland in baseball operations, and then stayed and kind of volunteered some stuff in the off season while I finished up my degrees, and I went back full time in 2007.
Wow, that's really cool. So your background is baseball as a player, and then you break into the business of baseball. Is being with the Vikings your first football job?
Yeah.
Okay. Obviously, I'm going to ask you what the difference between baseball and football is. I know the difference between baseball and football, but from a business standpoint, are the ways that you approach your day-to-day, are they different between the two sports, or do you still sort of look at things in the same from the same sort of general business perspective?
I spent 14 years in baseball between Cleveland and Toronto.
Okay.
The first few of those were in baseball operations. So player trades, contract negotiations, salary arbitration, the actual, drafting and who you put on the field and who's on the roster, anything tied to the major league team, and wanted to be a general manager. So I wanted to be sort of the Billy Bean kind of role, and was loving it. That was the absolute perfect place for me to start. The right group of people, right culture, right leadership, an incredible opportunity. And Mark Shapiro, who was the general manager at the time, he transitioned to become team president and oversee the business side and the baseball side.
Okay.
And he wanted someone to help him learn the business and ultimately help him run the business. And he asked me to switch over and become his assistant on the business side. So
Wow.
my last 5 or 6 years in Cleveland, I was in a business role. And initially I told Mark, no, I really wasn't that interested. I wanted to be a general manager. I was, in the perfect place to potentially get that opportunity someday. Roughly a quarter of major league teams are run by people that were literally same front office, same time as me in Cleveland, including Derek Falvey here with the Twins and some of our other colleagues, the Mets and Cubs and Blue Jays and all over the place. And so that was what I was still aspiring towards. And I didn't really know where the business side would take me. And ultimately, I decided to switch and move to the business side. And it was really for two main reasons. One was almost no one works on both sides of the business side and the sports side.
Right.
And the other was in baseball, the economics are such there's 75% of your revenue is local instead of national, and there's no salary cap. And I just thought maybe my opportunity to impact us winning World Series is actually greater if I help us transform how we're engaging with fans and how we're, building our brand and how we're, delivering what our fans are looking for and generating revenue and, putting that in the, pockets or the budgets of the baseball ops team so that they can, spend effectively on players. And so that's why I made the switch. And then when you ask the question about baseball versus football, some of those things are inherent into the differences. It's obvious, right? You were about to say it, but the number of games is very different. And that is, from a business perspective, it's a supply and demand issue, right? In Toronto, we had 4 million tickets to sell. And my first 2 years at the Blue Jays, we led the American League in attendance, 3.2 and 3.4 million tickets. And that means that 20% of your building is empty. And it's really not that simple because half of our games were sold out and half are, by definition, lower demand.
Right.
So the business challenge in baseball is how do you sell incremental tickets to what was already a slightly lower demand game? Yeah. And how do you do that without pulling people off of your higher demand games, right? So it's a relatively big, complex optimization problem across 81 games. And football, we have 670,000 tickets to sell, and that's including our 10 games, including preseason, right. A much lower supply and a very, very high level of demand because people are passionate about the Minnesota Vikings and the NFL.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. You don't really have to worry about moving tickets on a week-to-week basis because they're gone, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, we have a team that works very hard, and we don't ever take for granted the engagement from our fans. But we've been sold out every year, and the last 2 years at US Bank Stadium, we had the highest show rate in football, meaning the highest percentage of fans with tickets showed up. Wow. About 95% each year. And so our fans, when I say that Vikings fans are passionate, they are passionate and they're engaged and they're showing up, and the atmosphere at US Bank Stadium is one of a kind. And so, our expectation is that we're going to be sold out and the building is going to be full every single week.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, the building is incredibly loud. It is. It hasn't been always such a fun. I'm a Lions fan. It hasn't always been such a fun place for me to watch games. And of course, this year's game, unfortunately, I was not able to be at. But the past seasons where I've gone hasn't always been the most fun place. But the crowd is great from an atmosphere standpoint. There's a lot of ways where I prefer college football and basketball to pro because just the atmosphere you get is generally a little more live. This is right up there with the best college atmospheres I've been in. Just the volume, the intensity of the crowd, the way they get into it, and then all of the game day ops piece of it is so great. It makes such a fabulous experience.
I mean, US Bank Stadium is like nothing I've ever seen in any sport. Yeah. And it is truly unique. And, the team that, was here before I got here, building the stadium, putting together the game entertainment and the Skol chant and the drum and the Gallarhorn and all the rituals that are really special at Vikings games. It was very intentional, and they did just an absolutely incredible job in figuring out what's going to connect with fans.
And I know it was before your time here, but I'd also been to several games at the Metrodome, and just from an atmosphere and experience standpoint, I mean, I know they're on the same footprint, but there's no comparison. To me, at least. Long time, Viking fans may say otherwise, but I think that the experience and just the overall vibe at a US Bank Stadium game is completely different.
Yeah, I never made it to the Metrodome, unfortunately, but I've been to nearly every NFL stadium now and nearly every MLB, ballpark, and number of other sports.
Sure.
And I would say that US Bank Stadium is unique in terms of the way that the game is presented and the way the entertainment really engages fans, and then frankly the fans themselves and what they bring to it.
So because football, football and baseball, very different. Salary cap in football, like you mentioned, not in baseball. How does what you do as chief operating officer interact with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and the football operation side? How did the two sort of sides of the business come together?
Yeah, so most teams, right, I talked about baseball ops and business ops, or football ops and business ops. Usually those are distinct departments, and usually the leaders of those departments work very collaboratively or need to work very collaboratively together. Oftentimes those functions report directly up to ownership. Sometimes, relatively rarely, they report to a CEO or one person before they get to ownership. But for us, we report to the Wilfs, and we all need to work very closely together. I was very fortunate to be a part of hiring Kwesi and Kevin O'Connell, and they've brought just such an incredible culture here. And I think we look at ourselves as we may have distinct roles, but it's important for us to work together. And ultimately, we're trying to deliver for our fans. Yeah. And I may not ever tell them who to pick or what play to run, because that probably wouldn't make the most sense. But if I can help them in any way, I try and do that.
So you mentioned tell them who to pick. By all accounts, the team had a really successful draft last month. Granted, every team thinks they had a very successful NFL draft, and time will tell for everybody how that role bears out. Does your role impact what Kwesi decides to do in terms of, do you trade, do you stick, do you who do you take, or is it just do you sit in the draft room in the war room at all, or do you just watch it on TV like the rest of us?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and I think the short answer is no, right? Kwesi and Kevin and the entire scouting staff and coaching staff and all the football ops staff, trainers, medical, physical, analytics. They're working for months and months and months to prepare for all those different scenarios that could occur, and frankly ended up occurring.
Yes.
On during the draft, for the 3 nights of the draft or 3 days of the draft. I tend to go to the stadium for our draft party, which is a pretty special event. Having this year we had roughly 6,000 fans at US Bank Stadium watching the draft together and celebrating Vikings football, and we had current players and legends there, and PA and K-Fan were broadcasting from there. So pretty special night, on the Thursday night of the draft, and then Friday, Saturday, I did sit in on the draft, but more for my educational purposes and for me to observe than me contributing in any way.
Okay, that seems reasonable. So you came here to from Toronto with the Blue Jays. What was appealing to you about not just moving to a new city, but moving to a new sport? What was it about Minnesota and this opportunity that really spoke to you?
Well, when I decided to move to Toronto, right, I had a chance. Mark Shapiro had preceded me in becoming the CEO of the Blue Jays, and he had left a few months earlier. So I had sort of this option then of, do I stay in Cleveland where I'd been for 10 years, and do we maybe take on some more responsibility, but, see out what we think we're building here? Or do I move to a new country, a new city, a new fan base, a completely different jump as a leader, and, try that? And ultimately, when I look back, the decision was really, that was so much further outside my comfort zone. I loved Cleveland. I wasn't from Cleveland. I'm from Southern California. I had really close friends there. We were, building a family there, and we enjoyed living there. And Toronto was way outside the comfort zone, but it was very appealing, to have that, new experience. When I got the call for the Vikings, it was from a search firm, and it was mid-baseball season in 2019, and, got the call and this, hey, got this role. You actually might be a good candidate for. What would you think if I said Minnesota and football? And at first I kind of laughed. I said, I'm not thinking about that at all. I'm thinking about,
you're in the middle of a season.
I'm in the middle of a season. I'm thinking about how many tickets have we sold for the next homestand, and who's coming up after the All-Star break, and what's the off-season planning and the season ticket renewal starting to look like.
Yeah.
And I just said, I'm flattered that you called me, but I'm not really thinking about that. And they said, well, listen, Kevin Warren, who was my predecessor here at the Vikings, and an incredible leader, I've had the opportunity to follow. They said he's already announced he's going to the Big Ten as the commissioner, and he was with the Wilfs for 15 years, and they want someone to come in and overlap with him in some way before he departs. So this is going to move fast. Go home and talk to Jill, my wife, and come back tomorrow and let us know if you're interested in being a candidate. If you are, you'll probably go out to New Jersey to meet the Wilfs next week. And I said, okay. And so I went home. I said, hey, Jill, got this call today, and I don't think it's going to go anywhere, but, it's about the Vikings and football and the COO role. And she was 7 months pregnant with our third and youngest child, and said, no, this baby will be born in Toronto, and this is something we can't move right now. And we had a lot of good conversations following that. But I said, I don't think this is necessarily going to be a fit, but when do I ever meet with NFL owners? It's not a huge risk for us. Mark, Shapiro, he'll bless this. It's an hour-and-a-half flight from Toronto to New Jersey. For me to spend 90 minutes talking to the owners of an NFL team, I think I should go do that. Yeah. And what sold me on it was the Wilfs, as owners, as human beings, as people, as parents, as community members. They are exactly what you hear. They are incredible people. They're incredible people to work for and with. And so that's unique, right? You don't usually get to pick your bosses or your board of directors or your owners. And,
right.
When you find people that are very special that you want to work for, that's one thing that you look for. And then I think second, and we've already talked about it some, is baseball and football are very different. And after 14 seasons in baseball, I felt like maybe it's time for a new challenge, but the business challenge was very different. This was not the selling, a few hundred incremental tickets to a Tuesday night in April. This was, how do you take this absolutely beloved brand with a strong fan base and the world-class facilities that are basically brand new, and good relationships in the community and with businesses and with the government and the league, good people, good culture. How do you take all that and go to the next level? Right. How do you go good to great or great to greatest or whatever the right analogy is? And that was very different. And I just thought, between the ownership and the different business challenge, and then as we got to know Minnesota more and we thought more about Minnesota, the attraction of moving our family somewhere that we knew coming in we would love. And at that point we had a 5, 2, and about to be born third kid, and thought we want a place where we can raise our family and that our family can stay and become, strong members of the community, and that we would, feel close with, our neighbors and our friends. And, I think that was a big part of it.
So after you come back to Toronto from New Jersey, you've met the Wilfs, and as a exercise in job searching and picking the brains of really smart and successful people makes all the sense in the world. But then it turns out to be great. What's the conversation you have with Jill at that point?
Yeah, first of all, Jill is a rock star, and she has been absolutely incredible, and she makes all of this possible. But she's also a superstar business executive in her own right. And, within the Jewish community, I'm Jill Miller's husband, right? So, I walk into rooms and she is connected and has incredible relationships. And she's, doing incredible things as a leader. I am absolutely Jill Miller's husband. Part of it was both of us getting comfortable, both with the role and, like I said, with Minnesota. Jill grew up in Kansas City, and she went to Herzl camp for many, many years. Yeah. And so as we looked at it, what we realized, both of us, was that, we probably had more friends in Minnesota than anywhere else in the country, maybe the exception of the Bay Area, where we had both lived at different points in our lives. Mm-hmm. And that sort of surprised us, but it became a very easy and very comfortable place for us to move.
That's great. And it's like, it's not that far from where she grew up. It's a not terrible drive if you want to go back to see family in Kansas City, and we had a great airport, easy flights to wherever.
That was a big selling point, like for us to be close to her family, and getting 3 kids on a plane is not necessarily what any of us would sign up for when they're younger. And so the idea of being flexible and being able to drive to Kansas City and spend time with her family and have her family be able to spend time up here and drive up here was very appealing to us.
No, that stuff like that matters. Like the creature comforts, if you will, really, it makes a difference. Like that kind of thing matters when you're looking at a job or a city and all of that. I mean, my wife and I are also transplants here, and from Detroit, lived in Chicago for a few years, and then moved here. We have some family and had some friends here at the time we moved, but it's, to have a kind of lifestyle where you're not as much in the rat race kind of matters. Like that makes a difference in your outlook on a lot of things.
Absolutely. I mean, people told us coming in that knew us, from Cleveland, saying, hey, if you like Cleveland, if you like the schools and parks and neighborhoods and friendly people, you're going to love Minnesota. It's basically all that except twice as big. And if you liked, Chicago and Toronto, which we both did, it's got all the big city, things and attractions. It's just half as big, and, it's like literally, the place that, for us is just absolutely perfect.
That's fantastic. So how have it's been, yes, almost 6 years, very, busy time, obviously for both of you at the, raising 3 kids here. How has the integration been? I know it's come over a period of time, I'm sure, but like, how do you feel settled in? Is it always sort of challenging in this, sort of with what you do to kind of feel settled, or?
No, I think we do, and I think this is home. And we came here at a very interesting time. Jill and the kids, like they came here to move at the end of December of 2019. Mm-hmm. So we were here roughly all together as a family in 2 months or so before COVID hit.
Oh, so, nice timing.
Yeah. So for us, it was, we had just started sort of acclimating and building those relationships out when COVID hit. And, again, we are the last people that have any right to complain.
No.
Right. And so it was an interesting time to do that. But it's been incredible. And for us to, build relationships here and, cases, like Jill's, camp friends, like to rebuild, those relationships and to reconnect with people has been a lot of fun.
So you mentioned Jill and her connection to Herzl and reconnecting with her camp friends. How has the sort of integrating into the Jewish community, how has that been, and how has that differed from, maybe either Cleveland or Toronto in those stops for you?
Yeah, maybe a little harder for me to describe just based on age of kids. I think a lot of it is tied to our kids. I mean, everybody's been extremely welcoming. Our kids went to the JCC at some point for preschool in Temple Israel, and, they're in Hebrew school at Temple Israel. Sure. So I think it's been extremely welcoming and extremely easy, and our kids really enjoy that.
That's good. I think that helps make it a little bit easier. Obviously, so much. I mean, I remember this with my own kids who are now, both teens, but so much of the sort of relationships you make at a sort of as your kids get older is sort of through a lot of times where they're, the neighborhood, but also where they're in daycare if they're in daycare, And so for us, that's sort of, our synagogue was, getting to know people who are the parents of our, the people our kids played with at daycare. And that's sort of how that, you make those connections as you settle into a newish community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we've found that to be great. People are very welcoming. Our kids have, made friends, and, it's been easy for us to make friends either with, sort of their connections and communities or with our neighborhood. And it's been great.
That's excellent. That's excellent. So what, the draft is done, free agency is largely done. What is, the season starts, there's a mini camp, there's mini camps and whatnot. Training camp starts in earnest late July?
Yeah, late July is the start of training camp. So from a business perspective,
that's where I was going with it. Perfect.
Yeah, there's a handful of things. We're a pretty unique business in that our fiscal year end is March 31st. So, sort of between the later part of the season, the end of the season, and March 31st, it's all the normal things that businesses do. Budgets and business planning and performance reviews and things that, people may not think of the Minnesota Vikings, in that context, but we have the normal kind of business, planning cycle that others do.
Yeah.
April 1st rolls around, our new fiscal year starts, and we've got, from a business standpoint, we've got the draft and the draft party. We've got schedule release coming up where we announce, the 2024 schedule in conjunction with the NFL. We've got, the next bigger thing is training camp coming up in July, and then it starts with the season.
I mean, and that's sort of a lot of reasons why I wanted to talk to you, but I think there are people who know the Vikings from what they see on TV, and that's totally fine. But I think when it comes to sports, people don't always think about your role and the business role that comes with making, and how the on-field product and the behind-the-scenes, the office business product come together to make it all happen. So I think it's really helpful to get to, for people to get to understand that they do both exist and they do work in harmony, even though your role is definitely more on the behind the scenes and less out front.
Yeah, I mean, it is a big operation to host training camp. It's an even bigger operation to host NFL games. And, when we have 67,000 fans at US Bank Stadium, there's roughly 3,000 to 4,000 staff members working, whether it's law enforcement or ushers or concession, employees. And
That's a lot of people.
So there's a lot that goes into planning for those days.
Yeah.
Again, it takes, people often ask, well, what do you do during the off season? And it's, it's a big portion of our off season is planning for the season.
Right.
Like who are you going to have for different entertainment purposes, or what is going to happen during the games, but also all the planning that goes into making sure that we have the staffing and all the inventory we need for different things for those games.
And that's the stuff that falls to you, and the Kwesi and KOC handle the football side of things. And
correct. Yeah. So they handle all the things tied to the team.
Okay.
Right. So drafting players, signing contracts, free agency, trades, all the training and development of players, coaching of players, and then the things that people may think of as more traditional business functions are more what I am involved with. So finance, accounting, HR, IT, sales, marketing, operations, facilities, things like that are more when I say the business side, that's more what falls under the business side.
Got it. Well, I think it seems like it's a fun job. I mean, I'm sure a ton of stress. I know we're in the state of hockey, but I feel like the Vikings are very much sort of the team of Minnesota. No disrespect to all of the other teams in Minnesota, especially the Timberwolves, who, as we're speaking, are absolutely rolling, and the Twins are playing great, and Minnesota United are playing great, and the Lynx season is coming up. No disrespect to any of those great teams, but like the eyes on the Viking, it's just maybe because it's only 8 to 10 home games a year, but it just feels different when the way people talk about the Vikings compared to the other teams.
Yeah, we're really fortunate. Like you said, the entire state right now is, from a sports standpoint, is on fire.
Yeah.
And, one of the fun things about my job is being able to build those relationships with the other sports teams. And when COVID hit, Matt Maka, the president of the Wild, reached out to all of us and said, "Hey, like none of us really know what we should do next. Like let's get on a Zoom call." And that Zoom call that Wednesday turned into now 4+ years of every Wednesday at first, and now every other Wednesday, where we still meet and we still on Zoom, talk about the things that we're each dealing with, or it's been a really good set of peers to talk to, so Twins, Wolves, Lynx, Wild, United, and us, and it's been an incredible set of relationships, and it makes it fun because then when the other teams are playing well, like the Twins with their 12-game winning streak that just wrapped up, and the Wolves, and they're completely playing out of their minds, and they're unbelievable. And so when you get to see that happening around you, it makes you a bigger fan for those teams and for your peers that are doing well.
Having worked in sports as long as you have, and you're working for teams that you maybe didn't grow up rooting for, and so much of our rooting interests are tied to geography, where we grew up or where our parents grew up. How is it? Can you still be a fan of sports after having worked in sports?
It's a good question. I think it was one of my concerns going into sports was that I was a sports fan. I think you pour so much into it emotionally, you put so much time into it for your team, right? It's impossible not to be a fan of your team. Like that is, literally what you're spending all your time, doing, and trying to be successful at. The other teams, I think it's a little harder to put emotional investment in it. Like you can see it and you can appreciate, what they're doing and you root for them. But it's hard for me to, spend my downtime saying, "Hey, I'm going to go, sit and watch, a sport all day, every day." When I was in baseball, to be watching baseball literally every day from February to November, and then say, "Hey, I'm going to go sit on the couch for 7 or 8 hours and watch college football or watch the NFL." Right. Really hard because you do want to get out and do different things, and you want to spend time with your family and friends, and it's a different type of fandom, but you can still be a fan.
Yeah, I just wonder if it's different having you spend so much time seeing how the sausage is made, and then can you still enjoy it in the same way?
I think the great thing about sports is you can, because the moments are so special, and the atmosphere and the excitement and the adrenaline, that you can still understand and appreciate how everything gets set up, and you can understand the operations, and you can still find yourself being lost in that special moment on the field.
No, absolutely. Very, very true. Andrew Miller, this has been great, but before we let you go, last couple questions we always end with. First, what is your favorite Jewish holiday?
I'd say Hanukkah, and I think it's mostly through the eyes of my kids that they just enjoy it so much, and they get so into it, and they appreciate playing dreidel and gelt and all the candles every night, and it's sort of a special time with them. So I would go with Hanukkah.
Presents don't hurt either.
Presents don't hurt, but I think they've maybe found ways to get presents at other times of the year.
I'm sure they have. And what is your favorite Jewish food?
There's probably a lot that could go into it
Sure.
that have special meaning. Thinking, my Nana's cookies or latkes at Hanukkah have kind of some special meaning, but I have a problem with bagels and lox and cream cheese, and so that's probably my more go-to favorite Jewish food.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Andrew Miller, COO of the Minnesota Vikings. This has been a blast. Thank you so much for having me in your office, and with the exception of 2 games a season, best of luck with the year ahead.
We'll still find some way to convert you.
You try all you want, but if I survived 0-16 as a Lions fan, I don't know if I'm flipping now that they're good.
I understand.
Thank you very much. The Who the Folk podcast is a part of the Jewfolk Podcast Network and a product of Jewfolk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.